Here's how to freeze dry ice cream, but we're going to make it look fun while we're doing it. To start this, you're going to need a pan and some ice cream, some strawberries, and some blueberries. Freeze dried ice cream is not going to last for 30 years, but that's okay because this is probably only going to last a week at my house. For some reason, fatty dairy foods like heavy cream and butter just don't store well, even though they're freeze dried. So, although the strawberries and the blueberries could keep for 30 years, the ice cream is definitely going to be the limiting factor. I'm actually making this for a party that we're going to, and it's super nice because it's going to be hot outside, and I won't have to worry about the ice cream melting. And it probably goes without saying, but this is not the kind of thing that you're going to want to rehydrate. I'm sure it's possible to rehydrate ice cream, but I think it'd be so much effort that it wouldn't be worth it. One of the biggest mistakes that we see people do when they freeze dry ice cream is that they actually skip the freeze cycle. The problem with this is that if there's any ice cream that melts, it's going to throw an error code. Melted ice cream means liquid water, and liquid water will expand 1,700 times its volume once the vacuum turns on. The inside of the vacuum chamber is pretty close to the vacuum space, so if there's any water at all, it's enough to raise the pressure to the point that the machine thinks that there's a leak, even though there's not. The other problem with skipping the freeze cycle on ice cream is if there's any melted ice cream at all, it's going to foam and bubble and make a huge mess. And if you're doing ice cream with caramel in it, just know that the caramel is going to expand and that could make a mess as well. I wasn't sure which ice cream to choose for this, so I just went with the one that was most dense. This means that it has most cream in it. If the ice cream is light going in, it's going to be really light coming out, so I wanted something that was going to be a little bit more dense once the finished product was done. When you're doing a recipe like this that has multiple components, you're going to want to set the temperature to the lowest eutectic temperature. So strawberries are probably going to be the limiting factor in this. I could go a little hotter with the ice cream, but strawberries are going to want to set them at about 115 degrees. Normally blueberries would be a delicate item and I'd want to do them at about 108 degrees, but because I mashed them, this increases the eutectic temperature and allows them to dry a little bit easier. The pressure I'm going to use is between 900 and 1200 millitorr, but if I wanted to go a little bit faster, I could go up to 1500. I know I've covered this in a previous video, but just a reminder that if you want to go faster, you are going to get more water in your pump, and if you go slower, you're going to get less water in your pump. There seems to be a trade-off, and it's one or the other. 900 to 1200 millitorr seems to be the sweet spot, where there's not a whole lot of water getting into your pump and the cycle times are still pretty reasonable. You can see that the strawberries I'm cutting here are pretty thin, but the ice cream I did was really thick. The thickness of the ice cream is definitely going to make it take longer, but that's okay. As a general rule of thumb, the thicker the food is, the longer it'll take, and the thinner the food is, the faster it'll get done. A good example of this is something like shredded beef versus a steak. Shredded beef is going to take about 16 hours of dry time, whereas a steak, if it's an inch thick, it could take days to get done. If you have a 1-inch thick steak, that means that the water in the middle of the steak has to travel through a ½ inch of meat just to be able to get out of the food. Like I said, I'm going to be mashing these blueberries, and it does seem like anytime you puree a delicate item, like these blueberries or strawberries, it's going to increase the eutectic temperature and make it a little bit more stable while you're freeze drying. If you're trying to freeze dry a ton of berries, it does seem like pureeing them is going to be the best option. So while I was cutting all the fruit, I did stick the ice cream back in the freezer just to harden it up a little bit and so that way it wouldn't melt. These blueberries do have a thickening agent in them, just that way the juices don't run everywhere. The other thing that's fun about this dish is that you don't have to freeze dry it. You could just serve it as frozen ice cream. I'll probably do another video on freeze-dried ice cream sandwiches, but it's essentially the same process as all this. As a side note to all the military veterans, thank you for service, and we really appreciate what you do, especially here at Blue Alpine. But I do have to apologize that I was only able to get 11 stripes on this flag instead of 13, but I did my best. While I was doing this, I had to work pretty quickly because the ice cream started melting, but I could have made it easier on myself by freezing it just a little bit harder before I started doing it. I was thinking about it later, and I should have cut bananas into star shapes for this part, but that's okay, these will work too. Check us out at bluealpinefreezedryers.com.